All right, welcome back to Shawnigan Unfiltered, a podcast where we invite guests and discuss what we can do to make the school even better. Today, we invited a special guest, a 5-year resident of Lonsdale's and school prefect, Lucas Klassen.
Hello.
Okay, Lucas, today we are going to talk about boarding houses.
Interesting.
Being a 5-year resident and staff kid, you've been here, before many of us. And so what do you think the most important aspect of being in a boarding house is?
Well, yeah, so I've been here essentially my whole life, which is kind of crazy to say. But yeah, so the most important aspect of, the boarding house is essentially, I don't know, I think the brotherhood with the boys in the house, and just the support that you get with everyone in the house. You're never really by yourself, you know what I mean? When you're in a boarding house. So yeah.
I strongly agree with you. I think everything you say is quite factual. And do you think that the grade 12s in the house can potentially play a bigger role than the in-house staff members, say the house directors and the assistant house directors?
Yeah, for sure. I feel like there's a big divide between staff and student, quite obviously, because, staff are there to kind of keep us in line. But I think grade 12s are not even really a bridge, but I think we're just more trusted than staff a lot of the time. Just because we live the same experience as the boys in the house, as the juniors. So for example, I've been here since grade 8. So, I've lived through what, a grade 9, grade 8 have lived through. So I think it's a lot more, we kind of know where they're coming from. Whereas, a student or a staff member wouldn't have lived that experience unless they came to Shawnigan. So
yeah, I agree with you on that. I think yeah, there's no divide between us and the juniors and the rest of the house. So yeah. So, as living in a boarding school, we have inter-house events where houses compete with each other. And the purpose behind the inter-house events is to build house bond, house trust. And do you think that inter-house events truly builds house trust?
Yeah, I think okay, so personally, I'm not really a competitive person, but going up to inter-house, for inter-house track and field, one of the bigger events, and seeing all the boys compete, I think it really, you get to visualize people's effort that they put into the house, and it makes you want to do the same, which kind of builds a lot of trust in between the house. You see, listen, you're a grade 9 and you're looking up at a grade 12 running in 100 meters, and you can see how much love people put into the house, and it makes you want to replicate that, and that just leads to a bigger amount of trust in between the house. So yeah, I definitely think that inter-houses, even though some people are less competitive than others, are really important for house trust and house bonding, I'd say. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Back in grade 9 when I watched the grade 12s run, I think it really motivates and inspires people to become the best version of themselves. And even those who say they don't really care about inter houses, when you get to that environment, that atmosphere, they really get hyped up.
Yeah, for sure. I think, our spirit captains have always done a really good job of, we've always had the same songs going up to inter house, and all the chants, and it's just a very good environment for people to really see what people the love for the house that the grade 12s, the grade 11s, people that have been in the house before have for the house. So yeah, it's a great aspect of the school, I'd say. So
awesome points, Lucas. And leading on from that, I think probably one of the most important aspects of being in a boarding house, what do you think shapes the culture of the house?
Yeah, so I'd say personally this is a mixture between the grade 12s and the house staff. So immediately we had a switch of house directors, right? So from Mr. Monroe to Mr. Pollock, and there was immediate shift in the house. Both were there was positives to Mr. Monroe, negatives to Mr. Monroe, and then shifts to Mr. Pollock, which had the same effect. But then again, I think the grade 12s really have a really big impact. So we're the ones really interacting with the guys in most of the time. So if we're kind people, and we're make sure we're always looking out for the juniors, and always trying to push people to be the best versions of themselves, I think that the grade 12s really have a big impact. And it's also about how much the juniors participate in the house, so if people are participating a lot, it'll create a lot more bond, such as like an inner house. If people want to participate in inner house for like the love they have for the house, then it'll make people want to participate more and build a better culture. So yeah, I'd say grade 12's staff and like inner house culture, I think it's very important for building the culture of a house.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, especially in the boarding house where you have such a diverse group of people from all the ethnicities, it's very like all aspect that builds the culture. And from that, you've been in a boarding house for a long time, so as many others. Some staff members actually work here, coming from like being a student at Shawnigan. And I just want to ask you, are you happy with the current setup and management of the boarding houses?
I'd say so. So yeah, there are a ton of staff that come through the that come from Shawnigan, that have gone to the school, like Mr. Mays and whatnot. And I'll hear stories about like how the prefects used to be people who would like beat people if they didn't like uphold the culture and stuff like that. They were essentially people that had to keep the tradition, or else you would get like I don't know. But there's definitely a shift in the culture of the house, and just of the school in general. But I think, hearing from old staff, I think that it's shifted in a much better direction, the school. Just the setup of the school, the staff. And I think even just like in recent years, the amount of work that has gone into, changing the school for the better. So like, for example, like we had an old headmaster and he was great, but once Mr. Lamont came in, I think it really elevated a lot of the aspects of the school that were not really looked after. I don't know, like you're talking about like women's sports and just academics and fine arts and all these things that sometimes were, looked over in, the school used to be a very sports-oriented place. It still is, which is, has its benefits, but I'd say that the school shifted in a lot of, or like really elevated a lot of the other sectors of the school in very positive ways. So the shift in the school has gone really well, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think even from me just being here for 4 years, from grade 9 to now, I think like grade 12s have a lot more like chances to bond with the juniors. I feel like when I was in grade 9, I don't know if it was particularly in our house, but I just felt like there was a little bit of distance.
Yeah, that's facts. That's actually facts, yeah. Like I think the grade 12s used to kind of lead by, I mean, this is obviously not calling out anyone, and I actually really enjoyed a lot of the grade 12s, but I think a lot of the time it was about leading by fear, you know what I mean? Like, oh, if you like mess up, you're gonna get like whipped into shape, which it has its positive aspects, like you get whipped into a really good person, but I think the way that we go now is that we just like we have a lot more interaction, as you said, with them, and like we kind of lead as positive role models now, and I think that also really helps because we have good house staff that are telling us to do that. For example, Miss Russell will like say like, oh yeah, instead of you should be leading by example, like have your room clean instead of just telling the juniors to have their room cleans and not having yours. So but yeah, that's it.
Strongly agree with you, Lucas. Yeah, definitely change over the last few years for the better. And let's end it off here with probably the biggest question I have for you today. What would you change about boarding houses to make the experience more enjoyable for future students?
That's actually a really good question.
It can be, we have in our house events, sign-in times, like the discipline to get to build the house, rules in place, anything like that you would perhaps change that you think would benefit.
Yeah, I'd say I think there's a big divide. So I always thought about this. Like there's always been a big divide between like juniors and seniors. So I would say if we could it's been shrinking, right? The divide between juniors and seniors. But I think if we can do more to like eliminate that gap between like, oh, we're so high and mighty, and then they're like, the juniors. But I think if we can really bring both of the seniors and the juniors together a bit more, through house bonding or whatever it may be, I think that would be a big aspect of the school to really, improve on. So that's what I'd say.
Great answer, Lucas. I think so too. We, like you said, we've shrunk so much on on grade 12 being more dominant, and now I feel like we can approach each other more casually as friends, and I really like that, even as a grade 12. Here, I'll just throw it in there for fun. What has been, or what are some of your biggest challenges living in a boarding house? Perhaps like homesickness, people in the houses aren't as friendly.
Well, obviously not homesickness, because I live 2 minutes away. I don't know, biggest challenges. I think my biggest challenge is to moderate the different aspects of the school in the house. So for example, doing prep on Sundays can be difficult sometimes because people are just chilling in the common room, and you might want to be doing that. But I think that's a big thing where you'll be wanting to be with your friends because you're in a place with all your friends all the time, right? But then again, you have to be doing work sometimes, a lot of the time, especially now that it's what is it, April, and you have AP exams coming up soon. It can get hard to moderate your time like that. So I think that's probably my biggest challenge, to really get prep done and then also have time for the house and then sport and whatnot.
Yeah, it can be a lot, especially for a senior that's near the end of its months at the school. 100%. Well, thank you so much for coming on this podcast, Lucas. Any last words to say?
No, I would just say Raf's done a really good job with his solo project. So he's done really well, been very thorough. But it is really good. It got me reflecting on what I'm doing in the house, and it's really good, I'd say. But thank you very much for having me on. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being on this podcast, Lucas. I hope that, you can reflect upon yourself and use this information to better your future, even beyond Shawnigan. And, well, that's it. And that's all for today, folks. Until next time, see you next Sunday at Shawnigan Unfiltered.